Hey everybody, welcome to DBS Films Podcast. My name is Kellen. With me as always is my brother Brendan, and together we make movies with DBS Films. In this episode, we're going to hop into part one of a scene-by-scene breakdown. In these episodes, we basically take a look at the past movies we made, go scene by scene through them, tell you what we like, what we didn't like, and what we will look at improving. Be sure to take a look at our films online. We have The Haunting of the Murder House, we have The Girl in Cabin 13, and Into the Forest, all on Tubi for free, so you can go ahead and check those out. If you want to be part of the action, if you want to be in these movies, if you want to work on them, you can 100% do so if you join our Discord channel. We make movies for our fans, with our fans, so that is definitely the place to be. So before we hop into The Devil in the Room, scene by scene, I kind of want to get an overview of like our thoughts on it. I will say The Devil is my favorite of the Hateful Eight. Main reasons for it is I really just think the story has legs. I think it's something that's really cool. I'm a fan of supernatural stuff. When it comes to horror, I'm a fan of having rules, which this is like the first one where I think we really kind of fleshed out the rules. But I also think the major issue is we never should have made this movie at this budget level. You know, in hindsight, looking at it, I don't think this was an idea we ever will greenlight at that same budget level, just because being the idea, and again, to give you a little backstory, basically, we have a couple. One of the couple is going through the tragic loss of her sister, who isn't part of the intro, which she takes her own life, but it's quickly revealed that she takes her life due to a demon possessing her, who's also a sleep demon. So it's kind of the rundown. And again, with something like that, you're really going to need to amp up the special effects, amp up the effects, amp up the demon element, or else people are just going to kind of get confused at what you're at. And also the cracks of your indie budget and your production just shine really, really brightly. So that's my overall thoughts on The Devil in the Room. I'm curious what you think before we hop into the scene by scene breakdown.
Yeah, so Devil in the Room is actually my least favorite movie out of the ones that we made. And the reason for that is, we should have made a better movie. I think the premise is really cool. I think sleep paralysis is something that's really, really scary. But I kind of rate these movies just on a different level. And, looking at the budget, I take into effect of the rating, how good we are with, our knowledge and of the process. And I just think we should have made a better movie. I think we wrote a script that was just very dramatic, and it didn't naturally capture like the essence of what we were trying to do, the actual horror movie. I think the pacing was off. I think the production was not as good as it could have been for our skill level, and post production was just a mess too. So you kind of had this this crazy mess of a movie. Now, on the scale of like what we've done, it's a better movie than most things, but just knowing how much money we put into this and where we were as far as this is movie number 8, I think we should have done a lot better. So I hold ourselves accountable to this. I hold ourselves to a higher standard because this is number 8 as opposed to something like Gone. But I think we just kind of dropped the ball on this. But I mean, that being said, this was, I think, movie number 4 in almost like 4 months. So we were really cranking these out. I think we kind of got fatigued a little bit. And like Kel said, I remember we wrote this thing in maybe 3 or 4 weeks. It didn't have as much time as others did. And really, the fact that we had a really good production assistant who was able to get all this stuff scheduled, get a really good location, get a really good cast in this. If any of that kind of fell through, I think I would have just punted this movie. But since everything lined up, I'm a fan of just getting these movies uploaded. So I was like, all right, you know what? Let's give it a shot. And I think there's something there. I think we learned a lot in this process, so it definitely is worth it. The ROI on this, not monetary wise, but just learning and skill wise, was definitely worth it. And I make it again. That being said, I just think we made a lot of the same mistakes we made in other movies, and I just don't think we did this one justice.
Yeah, I mean, I can see very valid points in that sense. I go back to, again, I think we're just swinging out of our league when it comes to this concept, just because you really do want to oomph it up with the special effects, and I think it kind of confuses people. So that being said, let's go ahead and hop in. We have our intro. This is a slightly different shift in the intro in the sense of there's really not that panic moment right away. And overall, I think the concepts here and how we did it and how we executed it, I think it's more of a plot intro in the sense of like it provides really, really good backstory. But overall, it's really confusing. So to give you an idea, we have the sister of the main character, Jenny, She's walking back and forth. She calls her sister, and the sister doesn't pick up, which was like the major plot point of guilt. And I still think that's a fantastic plot point you can use. I think there are like, little times and moments where people can say, if I only did X, if I just did this, then it would have been different. And I think it is a good plot point and seed to plant. I think the biggest issue here, though, is you have no clue what's happening. Basically, what happens is, she's like, you just need some sleep. He's not real. So, we're kind of talking to it. And she goes to take a bath. She looks like she falls asleep. She opens her eyes. You can barely see that her eyes are now red, which was going to be kind of a bigger factor in the movie, but never really got executed on. She plugs in her hair dryer, and then she drops it into the tub with her. I think, again, the only thing that's missing here, in my opinion, is if you just had Frank in the mirror, kind of similar to what we did with the Haunting of the Murder House, where he's just right behind her, creepy demon right away. You see there's a demon. I think that knocks it up. But I would say, honestly, it's lukewarm only because you miss the action element of there being a killer or suspense or something like that. But I think the plot is really, really good in the sense that, okay, this person killed herself, which is all you really need to know.
Yeah, I think I actually really like this intro. I think it's not shot very well and we had a very small space in that bathroom, but the things you wanted to hit where, she's having some kind of mental breakdown, she's talking to people or she's talking to herself and then she essentially kills herself. And we did that really quick. I think it hits with a bang. I think the music is really, really good in this. And I agree. I think we just needed to show Frank was there. And I think it needed to be just a little bit longer and just more panicked. You really want to show the transition of her maybe having trouble sleeping or kind of popping in and out of sleep paralysis, then really starting to like fall apart, talking to herself, make it clear that she's seeing things, that she's schizophrenic. Like we really wanted to kind of highlight that stuff, that this is a person that's really having a mental breakdown. And then I think as that kind of ramps up in pace, then you show Frank for just a little bit, just enough to show that there's some kind of paranormal element there before she goes and drops the hair dryer in the bathtub. And I think that would have just spiced it up. But I think it's short, it's sweet, and it tells you at least two things. Number one, the sister killed herself and that she was having some kind of mental breakdown. So this is a mental this movie is going to deal with like mental struggles and stuff leading up to that. So I think it's solid. I think that it could have been just done a little bit better, and I think we would have been in a really good spot with this one.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think, in my opinion, the 2.0, you wouldn't really touch much. You would just, like we were saying, add a little bit more of that spice element into it. From there, again, I think one of the best things about having all of these movies is being able to look back and see the improvements. Because really, I think what we learned as a mistake from essentially the unseen and the intro and the character development, we never fall into that pitfall again. There's a lot of movement, there's a lot of action. We get our main character, she's waking up, she's moving, she's hustling. Clearly, this is a go-getter couple. They're both busy, but like they're supportive, which is also the second thing that I like seeing. And I always, want to say, hey, don't ever have your couple fight if they don't absolutely have to, because you basically say, okay, they're busy, they're together, they're going, and then she answers a phone call. My sister killed herself. Boom, connects the dot. So I think solid one too. I mean, I think the intro, the character development, this is pretty much as good as you're going to get, because you're going to essentially figure out some type of little way there. And for the budget, again, a house waking up scene versus, anything more dramatic like them at their office or at their job or something like that, all of the Morgan estate. It really just kind of shows you, both Morgan Estate, both this movie have very good intro developments where we first see our main characters, especially compared to the past movies. Now, can they be better? Could they look better? Production value? Yes. But like on the indie level, I think this is as good as it gets.
Yeah, I think we started real strong with this one. I think the intro is good and this little character development scene. And this is something that we talk about a lot. You can tell a lot about these characters through this scene. So instead of doing kind of like what we did in the Morgan Estate, where we sit them down and have them explain, or in a couple of our other movies, we have them sit down and explain to the audience like who they are. We really hit them with this little cool oneer scene. And yes, the production was just a little bit off and it could have been better. The audio was off. But for the most part, what did you get? You got that they're both, hustlers and bustlers. There's a lot of movement in this scene, which is very engaging. They care about each other because I believe he like gives her some eggs or coffee to go on the road. And then it ties it together with that sudden stop of, someone killed her sister. So immediately you're engaged with this. Obviously it looks very indie, it's very low budget, but we're moving the camera, we're having some cool shots in there. The pace is elevated. So I think we had like a cool montage of her like getting dressed in the morning as well. So there's some production value in there. I just think it needed to be cleaned up as far as like just the shots and the overall, like the lights are on and it doesn't look like a horror movie too much. But I think for, what we're trying to accomplish here, this 1-2 combination, this 1-2 punch in the beginning, makes this movie start off very strong. And I think a lot of people did. I mean, I have to go back and look at the data, but I don't think this was the part where people dropped off. If anything, this kind of hooked them in there and they're like, all right, let's see what this movie's about.
Yeah, I definitely think it is something where, really, really solid start, gets them into it, and this is about 4 minutes into the movie, so, you're kind of getting invested at this point in time. However, I think we then immediately stumble and fall when it comes to the next few scenes, cut immediately to just a really poor car looking scene, like, angle-wise. She looks sad, but, like, honestly, I remember mentioning, like, "Do we cut this?" And we're like, "I guess we're just gonna leave it." I know we cut it down a bit. Then we have her sleeping in bed to kind of be restless, and you show the fan. Then you have her walk over, and then she talks to her boyfriend, and her boyfriend's, like, "I'm here for you," which is good. And they're like, "We need to go." I was like, where it's like her landlord called. We gotta go clear the stuff out there. So they go to the apartment, and then like really just this apartment scene is just shot. Just it could be much better, specifically like the idol and the totem and like finding it. So do you want to kind of talk about, these are downbeats here. And I think still we mentioned it in The Haunting of the Morgan Estate. If you look at the Morgan Estate and you look at The Devil in the Room, they have very similar characteristics. Why is that? Well, we filmed them without editing a movie. And if you film without editing a movie, I can guarantee you that you're going to suffer the same mistakes for the most part, just because of how they flow. Morgan Estate had a massive 15-minute dead man's land of downbeat and story explanation, which is what we wanted to do because, again, we're coming off of Into the Forest and The Murder House. So the biggest feedback there was, I don't know what's going on. So the biggest feedback here is we're going to tell you exactly what's going on. So we're going to do that with 15 minutes of basically explanation. Now, in the Morgan Estate, we actually moved a pop scare up because of how long it was. So that kind of broke it. In this movie, from basically, the 4 minute, I mean, even if you want to count the morning intro, because I mean, again, nothing really scary happens. So from 3 minutes all the way to 10 minutes. So basically a 7-minute span of just kind of plot. The Jenny sister, she traveled. This was good. Take the idol. And the thing is, when I look back at it, there should be a pop scare in the apartment that leads to the idol, that leads to more in detail conversation. Something as easy to fix as that. So what are kind of your thoughts on, going from the phone call to her getting her back to her being restless to just the conversations to establish Jenny and to get the idol? Because to me, that's what I would peg as like kind of the slowest part of this movie.
And this is why like I have issues with this movie is because we're better than this. And this isn't just a production issue, it's just a screenwriting issue. We should have known how to tell this properly. So look, from when she gets up from when she's driving home to looking at the fan to having the conversation with Isaac to her getting to the apartment, that can all be cut in this movie will be absolutely fine. Because really the only thing in the next 7 minutes that we need to address is, okay, we want to have some pictures of the sister to see their relationship. Okay. And then we want to introduce the idol. That's it. This whole thing of like Isaac talking to the landlord and then sitting down on that couch can be cut. Her staring at the fan can be cut. The car could be cut. Honestly, I'd say like you can have it where, she gets the phone call that her sister's dead and it just hard cuts to them going to the apartment. It's so much better. It'll flow so much nicer. And then in the apartment, you either get a pop scare or do what we did in the Morgan Estate where something falls over and that is the totem or the box full of stuff. would totally be something that would work, just to highlight that this object is important. If you wanted to do or explain the relationship with the sister, have her going through the photos. Like we had them on the wall and it was really hard to see them and it really made no sense. Um, but I would have him going through the shoebox, or like the box falls over, it's a pop scare. You have the photos fall on the floor, she picks them up, and we actually did a good job with these flashbacks. Like that's something that you can do as an indie filmmaker. Have these flashbacks so then you can see the relationship in real time as opposed to having her just sit there and narrate to either her boyfriend. Like that's much more engaging, much higher production value. And then you get the real thing that we need to highlight, which is the totem. They take the totem. So I could really take this 7-minute sequence where nothing happens. It's just high drama. This is CW Hallmark production. And I could cut this down to a 2-minute scene, 2 or 3 minute scene with a pop scare and just much better pacing. And then save that rest of that time for something down the road like the climax, and you just have a much faster movie and it wouldn't be boring, and you cut so much drama out that the viewer would be like, all right, look, this is a horror movie as opposed to, am I watching a CW or Hallmark movie? Like what is up with all this drama? It's just like I don't know what I'm watching, because the first two scenes and the blurb and the cover tell me this is a horror movie, but it's just so dramatic. So you want to make sure you don't confuse your audience. And this is just one of the benefits of uploading these movies, is now I can see where these issues lie. In this 7-minute stretch, I think is, probably where a lot of people fell off, because it's just all over the place, too dramatic. And you can just really cut almost 5 minutes off this and just make this such a better movie.
Yeah, it really is the case where, like, when you look at it now, it's so clear, especially after, once you can view it, which is what we talk about. But yeah, it's just so much needless. And again, I think it is a rebound from Into the Forest and the Suicide House, because the biggest feedback was, I want to know what's going on. But I think the difference is, in those movies, we never picked a path. In this one, we picked a path, but then just stood on the on ramp instead of just getting right to the highway of what the actual story is. So I think that's the biggest slowdown of it. They get back, we have the flashback, then surprise, surprise, the power goes out, which, hey, again, if you look at the Morgan estate, you look at this one, they're walking around, there's the idol. The scary part of this was that the idol moved, by itself, in the sense of like, oh, it moved away and it's not there, and they popped and the person's behind them. What I will say though is this is actually much better than the Morgan estate one. So I think even at least, that in itself, it's still not very, good, but it's still adds suspense, adds tension, adds that ability there. And again, if we had like that pop scare where it falls over or something like that in the box, then you're kind of looking at another pop scare close there. So we have that, and then we have a nice couple scene where they kind of, talk and they're stressed out and whatnot. And then they go to sleep. So I would say, realistically, we're right back kind of on path. Again, we can do better, but the structure recovers quickly. We have a tension, we have a pop scare, we have a pretty we have the first element of the stakes, which is Isaac bringing up, hey, listen, I have to take the bar exam. I have to take the bar exam, and I just need to take the bar exam, which is essentially the man's character, which I love. But, again, that's us hammering home the plot. So what do you think about the lights out, and also kind of the first element of the stakes for at least Isaac and why he ends up leaving, which I think honestly was probably the first DBS boyfriend that's not he definitely is the best DBS boyfriend in the universe that we've crafted for him. And we'll talk a little bit more in detail what we mean when we get to some of those scenes. But what do you think about the lights out and then just the first element of the stakes?
I mean, I think you just take this lights out thing and do it in the apartment. And this is how she finds the totem. I think it's just like a rainy day with lightning that they're actually going through Jenny's apartment. You have a little bit more tension there because it's not your home. Maybe they're not very familiar with Jenny's apartment. And this is how that scares how they find the totem. And then I would just cut back to this little night sequence where he's like brushing his teeth. And I still think the bar is just, it's, you're really hammering home something that doesn't really need to be hammered home. He could just be going on a business trip, and that is just as good as this bar. We did so much work on making sure that this bar thing made sense, and I think we just went a little bit too overboard on it because I think we struggled with in the Morgan estate. It's like, why is this guy leaving all the time? And we wanted to really kind of, you know, bring that up and address that plot hole in this one. But I think we went too far on the other side. But I mean, it works. It shows that they're, you know, young and up and coming and they're hard workers. But I think you could have condensed a lot of this stuff. I think the scares could have been better and you just would have had a better paced movie. But I think we did kind of get back on track with this. You know, I'm not a huge fan of the Isaac scare, and we did it in the Morgan estate with Eli scaring Meg. If you can have something else, I'd say try and do that. But I mean, it's not boring, which is good. So I think we're back on the tracks here after, you know, losing the viewer for essentially 7 minutes. I think the people who made it through that really boring sequence got rewarded with something that's actually spooky again.
Yeah, because honestly, like I said, this is the dead man zone, and from here we, get right back on track. So you have the little stakes, and then we have our first real pop scare, which is the dream. She wakes up, she's walking around, she gets a glass of water, which is classic, and then bam, she gets pop scared. You abandoned me. So it's like, oh, there we go. There's a sister. And right there, that's the reason why we love dreams. And this is why I love this story. And I really still love it, is because dreams allow you to do so much stuff in the sense of, having consequences that aren't actually real, that aren't actually there, that aren't actually getting um, the main characters to be like, I need to get out of this house, or we need to do this, which is very typical of any kind of horror movie. You typically just try and leave. Well, this one, it's like, okay, it's just a dream. So I think you can really fall into that. And that's why I do like this one. But I think again, tracking shot, walking, can it be filmed better? Angles, 100%. But like overall, the form of it being a dream and scary and right there, I think it's perfect in the sense of, that's the structure that we need. Could we execute on it more? Yep, but it's gonna be your classic dream scare. So what do you think about the first dream one?
I mean, I think it's really good. I mean, honestly, I think this is one of our better pop scares of the entire time that we've done, or at least out of the first Hateful Eight movies. Does it really make any sense when she goes to the closet? No. And I remember having like issues with the DP here. Like he just was not getting what we were trying to do. It was, just a lot of it was a lot of communication stuff that was just not happening. And this scene took forever to film, and then it took forever to edit. And really, that scene where Frank comes out of the laundry room is something that I shot. And it turned out to be one of our best pop scares that we have ever had. And I think that gave me confidence when we were doing this pickup stuff, um, to actually go and, start to film this stuff myself, because I was like, all right, like the pop scare that we filmed originally in this movie, it wasn't even like, I think we just decimated the 180-degree rule. It just didn't look good at all. So we're like, all right, we're going to try and pick this up. Nobody knew it was Kel's house. And just getting that pop out of a place that you really can't see, you can't even see that room's there, just gave you that kind of, oh boy, this is like, it gave you that jarring thrill. And that was like one of the first times I've got feedback from people saying like that was one of your better pop scares. So I think the dream sequence is good. I think it's paced well. It just, to go from that bed to the sink to the cabinet to get the pop scare took a lot of time as far as like actual time on set. And that would be my only thing. But I mean, I think you just move this up more in the movie, and you do that by compressing and removing a lot of the drama stuff. And I think that, at that point, if you just make these small little tweaks, you have a very, very good movie right now.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, again, the only real low point was right there. I think you do kind of, again, in the dream ones, like for instance, if we're going into like the 2.0 version, I would just turn up the intensity in the sense of maybe you have Jenny and something like she's normal, and then it cuts back and she's electrified because she knows what happened to her, in the sense of like you just have that gore and that element, that special effects. But again, that's gonna be a massive budget. So like, to me, the structure is there. It's just, again, it's like, man, I wouldn't try one of these movies at this level. So she wakes up, they wake up. He's like, yeah, I'm gonna go to work. She goes to work. We have the office scene. So kind of we'll go through the whole office scene. And then when we get to the montage, we'll kind of break into that one. The office scene is really clunky to me, but I like it because it's a different location. So, there's things we've talked about before where I think there is a massive value in having a different location and you want to be strategic about it. So I think that's good, but I think it's kind of the dialogue also is shot really weird again, where like the angles are really aggressively below them, like looking up at the characters twice. And I think that kind of maybe it takes a little bit away from it. But it feels like a clunky scene that is a good concept. Having her there, having her want to take her mind off of everything by working, and then having a boss who's like, no, you need to do it. Also, the dialogue where it's like, this, I'm not asking. It's like, I'm not asking you to take your vacation. I don't think you're actually allowed to do that. So, like, there's just a whole little bit of oddity to the whole scene, but I think the concept of having that scene there serves its purpose. So what do you think about the little office moment we have?
Well, I mean, like, what's the purpose of this scene? To just show that she wants to work? I mean, there's really no purpose to the scene at all. I mean, you could cut it in this. You could literally cut this out of this movie and just start with her running and jogging and getting back, and it would be totally fine. So I think that like this is an indie pitfall. Is like you have a lot of these scenes that just do nothing. It doesn't push the movie forward. I guess it develops the character a little bit as like she's a workaholic. She has like the stuff going for her. And I kind of feel like it's a trope that we're kind of falling into because we try to do the same thing in Morgan Estate. And like I said, both these movies were filmed. We didn't get them uploaded till later. So they kind of suffer from the same kind of issues. But really, I mean, other than say that she's a hard worker, there's no way, there's no real reason for this scene. And it nice, it does give us kind of another like angle or anything like that. But at this point, I would rather her be getting closer to Dr. Goubeau, like getting closer to the meat of the story, which is dreams. I think that would be better. I think if you could have moved the therapist scene up quicker, right now would have been better. We're kind of just stalling where we needed to go, and which is like the main plot of this movie, which is she's seen a demon in sleep. And I think I would have just moved that up. I would have cut this out and moved it up and then save that extra time for the climax, because that's really where this movie gets moving.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely see that. I think the only reason I really like it is because you have a different location that looks good, like which is the office one, and I think you could execute on it. But again, it is something where you could easily cut the scene out. So we go from the scene. She gets sent home, so she's like, "All right, I'm gonna go ahead." I think the montage is actually done really cool. Like I honestly like the tripod and her like teleporting, like that effect, where basically it shows her cleaning, moving about the house, kind of being bored. I think the one thing that always makes me so sad is this was an absolutely beautiful horror house. I mean, like it just wide open spaces, lake, and like I just don't think we did it justice in the sense of capturing all of the coverage of it. But it's absolutely beautiful. She goes out to the lake house, she goes for a run. She goes and then she takes a shower and she ends up laying down for the bed. She gets up, she goes to the bathroom, she shuts the mirror, and surprise, surprise, classic mirror scare. Jenny's right behind her. She turns around, bam, Frank the demon. So, what do you think about the whole montage? I think the downbeat is set up. I think this is honestly a really good combo. This is again showing us that we have a scene that moves, which is there's montage, there's movement, there's you get an understanding of what's going on. Then you have it to where it sets up the pop scare and there's a scare. So much like in the Morgan estate where we kind of had, the scenes blending together in a good way, you have the same effect here. So it kind of shows the improvement of how you have a downbeat into the upbeat. So what do you think about this little combo of scenes?
Yeah, I like the montage. I mean, I'm always a fan of montages. I think they add production value. I do like the quick cuts, the quick hard cuts of the montage. I'd like her to be doing something else besides cleaning, but we didn't have any ideas at the time. But it's definitely one I actually kind of forgot that we had this, tool in our arsenal. But it might be something we want to kind of look at for the next couple of movies because it's a really cool way to do a montage. As far as like, I mean, you could just started this again without that office scene and been totally fine. And I do like, the downbeat into, seeing the sister. I think it's good. And that scare's done a lot, and we just did it really poorly. I think that's just another thing where it's like this should have been handled better in pre-production. I remember the bathroom being very, very small, so it was kind of difficult to do this. But at this stage, after making 8 movies, this is a scare that we should be able to hit hard. And we just kind of fail at it. It just was not done well. And this is one of the reasons why I just have a problem with this movie is we dropped the ball all the way through this process in all 3 phases. And, just this production value of being able to just shut a mirror and being able to see the dead sister in the mirror as a pop scare should be very, very easy. And it wasn't. And it turned out, weak. And that's just, my feelings with this movie is that we were better than this and we should have done better.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely see where you're coming from when it comes to just the level of execution that you can have. Because again, it is something where like the structure's there, but we just need those extra oomph moments to really kind of push it over the top. So from there, we end up having, her waking up again and being like scared. So she goes out and she's by the fire pit. And I mean, again, this is beating home the same points of like the bar, which again, realistically, at this point, it probably should be Gubo. Like we really should be pulling it towards the idea that there is a demon or something like this at this point. But because we didn't have that plot device yet, we just kind of talked about them being stressed, being happy. At least they're supportive. I think the content's kind of meh, but the overall scene and structure of it when it comes to downbeat, you got to fire. It looks good. So, what are your thoughts on our fire pit scene?
I mean, just looking at like right now as a top down view of how to fix this movie, after that first night sequence with the pop scare where Frank comes out of the laundry room, I would have had her go to the therapist. And then after the therapist, she comes home and does this montage. The therapist is like, here, I'll give you some pills, but really just try and get your mind off things. Like go and like do something in your house. Just change it up from cleaning because I really don't like that. Just anything else, some kind of activity, some physical activity would have been great. Running montage, we already had that in there. Her watch stops and she pushes further because she's motivated, which I always think is absolutely hilarious. But then this fire pit scene, if you would have had that, or after the pop with the sister, she goes and meets Gubo. So you're meeting Gubo right now. And then after that, we have the fire pit scene where she's talking to her boyfriend about Gubo. And this is just much better pacing because the fire pit looks great. And we did a great job with the fire pit scene. But what are they talking about in this fire pit scene? Just how stressed they are and they want to go on a cruise and get drunk somewhere. It's just kind of fluff stuff. Instead, we could have been like, hey, I went to a therapist and I couldn't find anything, or she gave me some pills and, she told me to take my mind off things. But then I found this sleep paralysis guy who's like telling me all about this crazy stuff. What do you think about this? And you can honestly use him as like a device because at that point, the viewer is the boyfriend. It's like, whoa, like, what are you talking about with this Dr. Gabo person? Explain it a little bit more. And she could go into it a little bit deeper there. She'd be like, hey, I'm seeing things. And the boyfriend's like, his job would be like, oh, come on, like this guy sounds kind of wild. And then he starts to build that lore of, all right, do you trust the therapist who's going to treat it with drugs? Or do you trust Gubo who's like, hey, don't take those drugs? Because if you take the drugs, then Frank can actually come in and, like possess your soul essentially. So like, or like the lore that we kind of built with this movie. And immediately, instead of doing this, 15 minutes later in the movie, we're doing it now, which is like the quicker you can get into the fundamentals of your story, the fundamentals of your lore, the better that movie's going to be. And I think one of the big problems with this movie, we took too long to get it to where it needed to go to get on track essentially of that actual lore that we're building because we just had so many fluff, dramatic scenes.
Yeah, I mean, it really is the case where like you got to pick what that content is because it is good. I mean, he does bring up, he's like, you should go see my therapist. She used to be my babysitter, which is such a weird relationship, but we had to, why does he know a therapist? So that's how it used to be my babysitter. So they go from there, and then we get another pop scare that I think is really good. So, it cuts from there, and this is again the great part with dreams is you can just pop right into it. There we go. You don't need to tell the audience or even that what's going on. So she's walking through the house, and then bam, she sees Frank the demon right in the corner. He gets her once. She runs in, she runs back to the room. The door slams behind her. There's another action moment. She sits down on the bed. The phone starts ringing from underneath the bed, which I think is a great element too. She looks under there. Bam, Frank got another scare on her. So I think we were, in my opinion, improving the pop scares too. The problem is you can't really show Frank too much because then it's like, oh, it's just me with a mask on. So you're kind of limited in those areas. But I think, again, this pop scare right into the dream, I think this hits. I think it's a good one. I think for the indie level and style of scares that we do, they're all there. Again, could it be filmed better? Yes. Could it look better? Yes. Could have been darker in some areas. The bedroom's pretty light. So there's a lot of areas that we see that can make it better. But on the grand scheme of like the Hateful Eight and everything there, I think this is very solid, two beat pop scare structure. So what do you think about this one?
Yeah, I mean, I really I spent a lot of time, working this one. And I was really excited about it because it was like a triple pop. It's kind of you turn the lights off, you don't expect anything spooky, you see them, then the door slams, there should have been more tension, and then you see the girl and the girl's under the bed, and it's like a cool little sequence. It really is a cool sequence, and it's just so cheap. It was just the way it was done was just so cheap, and that's just like me not knowing how to do these things. And once again, so just communicating like what I had in my head to everyone on my team to get this thing to where it needed to go. But it's just it's almost like depressing to watch this because it could have been really, really, really good if we just shot it better, if we gave it a little bit more time and love, because it just needed more suspense. It was just almost too quick. And I think a lot of that is because a lot of it didn't cut together very well, so we had to cut a lot of it, so we're trying to cut and, move around on motion. Um, but this one, it's a sad one because it could have been really good, and this really would have, like, pushed a lot of people forward in this movie, and instead, it's just kinda cheap.
I feel like I'm trying to brace the impact of knowing what you're gonna say, where I'm like, yeah, the structure overall and whatnot, because it definitely is. I mean, there's a lot more you could do with it. There's a lot more you could do with the elements, and really, I mean, two of two of the major benefits that came from the haunting of the Morgan estate and the devil in the room was confidence in our ability to edit, and then confidence in your ability to film, because there were pickup shots between both of those movies, and they came out really good, more so in the devil in the room just because we had to really scrap some of those in there. But I think again, it starts escalating to that element, and I think one of the things is easiest way to communicate it to your crew is be the crew. So if you end up doing that, then you're going to really get much better visions on it. Because again, I love the structure of it, but yeah, I mean, oh no, he's there. Oh no, he's under the bed. It's lukewarm at best, but I'm still going to defend it. Go devil in the room. So she wakes up again, and Isaac, as always, is like, I'm sorry," which is just a weird reaction to nightmares for me. Like I feel like it's okay or something. But he's like, "You have to go see my babysitter therapist," and she's like, "Yep, all right, cool thing." She does the appointment, and then she shows up here, and this is just like, and you know what? I give props to the therapist. She's a fantastic actor. Sky was a fantastic actor. We put them in such a boring and bland environment, so spaced away, just back and forth. And like, really, I mean, I'm trying to think in my head now, maybe you'd have her like walk into the office and maybe like she would show her some things and whatnot. And I think one of the bigger ones is like, to me, the whole point of the therapist is to be like, of course you're having nightmares. Your sister killed herself. Like, of course you're in a bad state. Like, you need to embrace this. You need to grieve through this process. Let's grieve with drugs to take some of the edge off, So I think, again, the structure is there. How we execute on it, wide open room, sit them down right away, cut, back and forth, and then we're done. So what are your thoughts on the therapist scene?
Yeah, this is the scene that killed the movie. This is where people fell off because you have this very long dramatic movie or scene, very long dramatic scene. The audio is horrible. The way it's shot is very poorly shot. It's very boring, and it goes on for like 3 or 4 minutes. And I understand why we had the therapist in here, because you want to have the therapist and the drugs on one side, and Gubo and his crazy paranormal investigator stuff on another. And that was kind of like the devil and the angel on the girl's shoulders telling her what to do. I think you can cut this therapist out completely. I think if you just made Gubo the guy and you have him here quicker, I think it just would have been a much better movie. Like, have him work with her, and maybe you know, I don't know why she wouldn't go to a traditional therapist, but I think you can kind of, maybe Gubo is a regular therapist, but he kind of like deals in the dark arts of nightmares, would be like maybe his plot point. And she goes in to see him over like grief and loss, and he understands. He's like, whoa, this isn't just about loss. This is about like this lich character. But I really don't think you need this therapist. And she did such a great job. And like, it is good, but it's a good scene for another movie, not this movie. It just doesn't fit. And I think this is the biggest problem. And I remember from the data, this is where people just dropped off this movie. And this is one of the reasons why it really struggled to recoup its funds, was just because this is it, man. This people made it here and they're like, all right, we've had like a good amount of pop scares, but like this thing is just like, what is this? So I think you just bring in Gubo. He's such an interesting, wild character. I think you just make sure that he understands his lines, and then really you're good to go. So that would be the way that would fix this movie. Is just get Gubo in here quicker, get rid of this dramatic therapist stuff, and I think you have just a much better paced movie.
I'm gonna fight you with that one. I'm gonna have the therapist still. I think you can improve the therapist, but I like having two vocal people next to one another. So I'll insist on fighting that, even though you have such a bad taste in your mouth that you want to get rid of the therapist completely because of it. Because if that scene's bad, wait till we get to the next scene at the end, because that scene was brutal. So picking up again, we have her. She's got her fresh new drugs, which is going to help her sleep. So she's happy, smiling. She's making like pasta or something like that. She goes to take she goes to take the pill, and then there's a knock at the door. It's like, oh, suspense. So she goes there, and we got our FedEx delivery of the luggage lost. Now, quick little caveat I want to have about this luggage stuff. I remember for the longest time, this was a huge issue of how do we progress the plot? How does she get an item that basically shows that she's seen Frank the Demon too? And the way we did it was her notebook. How do we get the notebook to her? And it was one of those ones where like I did it in the Haunted the Murder House, where I was like, just have a note with her password on there. I was like, just have the FedEx guy show up. Just have the FedEx guy show up. And we spent a good amount of time, and you know what we did? We had the FedEx guy show up. Now, yes, that is for me to take my compliments and say, hey, I know what's up. But I think the big point I want to say is the reasons we were fighting those, and even myself, I was like, this is a super lame cop out. You know what I mean? Like, it's obviously a plot device. It's not great writing in any means. But I think a lot of indie writers might get caught up in the idea that it needs to be something. And realistically, no one ever mentioned anything about FedEx. No one ever mentioned anything about the password. So I think this scene, well, again, it's just kind of moving it. To me, I think it's just a testament, because again, to me, it's like this is like the password scene all over again. It's just designed to progress the plot by any means necessary. So she goes there, she sees the picture of the demon. I think overall for a downbeat, it's good. You know what I mean? It's interesting. There's movement to some degree. Definitely not, compared to the therapist scene that we just came from. It's definitely something that has a lot more movement and motion to it. So what are your thoughts on that scene?
I mean, I like it. I like the FedEx delivery thing. I thought it was interesting. It makes sense. Like, she was traveling, but then I don't think she dies when she was traveling. So maybe it doesn't really make that much sense, but no one brought anything up. And once again, like, I completely agree with your point. I think a lot of writers give up when they can't get to they get to a scene and they're like, well, I can't figure out how to fix this. When really just, if you got to put some cement over it and just cover it up, and try your best to just make sure people don't focus on it, then do that. Like, we've covered up a lot of plot holes with just pretty much like paper mache, WD-40, and some duct tape. And, we got a full movie out of it, and no one's really brought it up. Usually when you're writing a script and when you're shooting a movie and when you're editing the movie, the small little things that you're concerned about never really get brought up. Like I remember in the murder house, we had a glass window where they could easily just broke this glass window on the door and crawled out. And I think maybe only one person out of the thousands of reviews that we have actually mentioned that. So like the things you're concerned about usually aren't going to be problems. Now, if you make a movie and you get feedback from friends and family and, people who like horror movies, and before you release it and they start to bring up stuff, then yes, obviously you try and fix it. But for the most part, like just keep the movie and the story progressing. Don't spend too much time on this stuff. The FedEx thing was great. It was engaging. This scene's great because you have her actively looking through this notebook. You're cutting against an interesting scene with Isaac because it's a cool looking shot. He's moving around, so we have movement. So it's just a very engaging scene. Are the pictures and everything in the notebook drawn very well? No, but for the most part, it gets the job done, and it highlights that look for the first time. The sister is experiencing what Amanda is experiencing, and that is like the real juice and spice of this movie, that they're both having the same experience. Um, and it was like the way we hit that was really weak. We really wanted to be like, oh my God, like they're having the same thing. Like this, what happened to her sister to kill her sister is now happening to Amanda. And this is supposed to increase the stakes dramatically because her life is now in danger. Instead, it's like, oh no, this is just a drawing of something. So I think if we didn't lose you in the therapist scene, I think right now you're pretty much you're walking a fine line of just turning this thing off and trying to go on something else.
Yeah, you're definitely holding on there. So while I think the actual notebook came pretty good. I mean, much better than the first round draft, which if you're on the YouTube right now, you can see the first attempt I had of drawing Frank, which just looks like sexy Squidward. So we do have a YouTube. If you're listening to this on the podcast, you can see what it is, but it's one of my favorite memorabilia from the movie. But yeah, I mean, I agree. It's one of those things where like until you start doing it, you never know how much a twist is actually going to have an oomph. And I will wager that the vast majority of oomph is never going to ever happen. It just feels like it in your head. You're like, okay, this is good. This is where we're at. So this movie is literally an hour long because that's all we could muster. So that brings us to the halfway point. And with the halfway point, I kind of just want to talk about what we would do if we revisit this idea. In my opinion, I really would like to swing big with this concept. I would like to make it a family. I would like to make it happen to multiple people. I'd still have the drama element of some tragedy and of basically a suicide caused by potentially the sleep demon or whatever happened. Then I would have it spread to basically the family, maybe one by one, until you kind of have either a whole family do it. If we're revisiting this concept, you can kind of do it the same way. But I just really, when I look at this concept, I just like, I'm not touching this until we have a very big budget for a lot of really trippy, crazy scares. I mean, I would want it to be, the dream world just goes wild and nuts. And until you have that budget, I don't really feel like I'd touch it. If I had to remake this movie at this budget, I would say you add Frank in the beginning, like we mentioned. You hop them right to the apartment. You don't have to explain it. You increase the therapist's just engagement with it. And you just make sure we work and execute on those pop scares. Like I wouldn't really touch the indie structure too much, but the 2.0 version, I really would want to put a lot more ammo behind it. So what are your thoughts on, the different approaches to this story?
I mean, I do think you need a budget, but I do believe that you can actually do this on our scale. It'd be on the very high end of like our scale budget wise, but I think you kind of look at like what we're doing with Into the Forest. Who's the best character in Into the Forest? It's Nelson. Who's the best character in this movie? It's Dr. Gubot. And I think if you just change it to, you keep the intro the same, but then Dr. Gubot kind of goes rogue and does his own like sleep study where he understands that Frank the demon's out there and he's like trying to like either capture him on tape or record this kind of phenomenon that's going on. Like he's obsessed with this dream world. And it's almost like a sleep study at that point. And Amanda could be one of the people in the sleep study. I think it could be done on a lower budget, and you could easily just get a nice like a giant mansion house like we had in Morgan Estate, and this is where he's like conducting his underground sleep study, and you would just need some budget for like getting the machines and the wires and everything hooked up. But at that point he's like trying to almost like pump them with drugs or sedate them to get them to go into this dream world and then just try and record it. And, obviously it would go wrong because Frank the Demon would actually get unleashed and you'd have like this crazy, climax with this movie. So I think you could do it. Um, but it would be on the higher end of our budget. And I just think there's a lot of other ideas that we have that are just more cemented and are easier to shoot, are just better scripts for what we're trying to do for this one. I think this is definitely something similar to was it Insidious? That was Insidious the one where they went to the dream world?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So it'd be like along those budget lines, would be like what I would think for this one. Like you would just need to really have that climax dream world sequence, and that would be like the bread and butter of the movie. So then once you have this 20-minute dream world sequence, it's just all right, how do we get there? And how do we get there in the most engaging way? So I think for what we're doing now, I think we have a lot of other ideas that are better suited. I think you could do this one. I think you could do this one also as a found footage movie, which would be kind of wild. But these are things that you just kind of, you have to look at your ideas. Like this is one of the reasons why we do not just have one script, because someone would try and write this movie. They try and write this script, and it's a tough one. This is a tough movie to make, as opposed to just having other things and just being like, all right, which one of these 10 scripts is the best one? Which one of these 10 scripts is the one that we want to shoot next?
Yeah, I mean, again, I wouldn't approach the script. I think following Gubo would actually be almost like another script in itself. Like I think you can actually, even if you want to have like almost like a universe of it. So again, the core concept is absolutely fantastic. As for found footage, let me know once you figure out how they bring the camera into the dream world. I'm sure no one's going to comment on that, but yeah, you figure that one out. You let me know. We'll go ahead and film that bad boy. But yeah, I think again, it's just something where the biggest thing to me with The Devil in the Room is I can never see us green lighting this at this level, at this budget. I mean, I think we just know now, we just understand. And I think it comes from just a lot of things, why would you want to overstretch, have a higher budget and know it's going to be a less production when we can nail a concept like The Girl in Cabin 13, and I think actually this is a really good, as we end, after The Haunted of the Murder House and after The Devil in the Room, we really consolidated stories. So almost what we saw with The Invited into the Unseen, we had happen with The Girl in Cabin 13 and the Haunting of the Morgan Estate. So do you want to, just for all indie filmmakers out there, why simple is key? Why, a big milestone of ours was taking these two productions that were bigger scale and being like, shit, we still don't know what we're doing.
Yeah, and I think this is honestly something that's so overlooked in the indie community, is really try and tell this story with the most basic plot that you possibly can. Like really just try and keep it as clean and minimalistic as possible. Because even if you're adding these little scenes in here and you think they're going to add character development, you think they're going to do a lot of things for your movie, they're just going to slow it down. And really, if you can cut the scene from the script and it still moves forward, it still gets you to where it needs to go, then cut the scene. And I think you saw that in Girl in Cabin 13. You saw that especially in the Murder House. I think you really see it in Shapeshifter. Shapeshifter is a very clean movie where it just gets them to go. Really, the only like downbeats we have are montages, which really, speed up the pace. And the Into the Forest 2.0 script, once you start that intro, it goes all the way to the end. And by having that extra time, by chopping off like 15 minutes of these boring scenes, these downbeats that can be done just in a more creative way, that gives you 15 more minutes on your climax, on the, the pacing of the movie, to add in the scenes that really this audience is looking for, which is, action. They want to turn on this movie. They want to be entertained for an hour and 20, hour, 30 minutes. And they just don't want to have any downbeats. When you start to have downbeats, people are going to take out their phone. And then all of a sudden you're competing with Instagram, you're competing with TikTok, you're competing with Facebook. if they don't even have the opportunity to take the phone out of their pocket, you're going to get rewarded because your whole movie is going to get watched and the reviews are going to be better because, it's just going to be a better movie. It's going to be a better experience. If you can get someone to devote an hour and a half of their time to your movie, you're going to be in a good place.
Completely agree. So that's going to go ahead and wrap it up. Be sure to take a look at our movies online to see how we've improved. The Haunting of the Murder House, The Girl in Cabin 13, and Into the Forest are all on Tubi for free right now. You can join our Discord channel. But in our next episode, we will cover part 2 of The Devil in the Room. Until then, have a good one.